How's it going, my bakers? I hope you're having a fantastic day so far. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I hope you're ready for it because this recipe might just be the easiest recipe you've ever seen. So let's go to the kitchen and check it out. You can find many simple bread recipes on my channel, especially in the basic breads playlist. But this one takes the biscuit. Really, it's the easiest, most hands-off thing ever. A no-knead cold fermented loaf, which does not require any shaping or folding. All you need to do here is mix the dough, roll it in some seeds, place it in a baking tin, put it in the fridge and bake it on the next day. And you'll get this beautiful seeded sandwich bread. It has a nicely moist crumb and it tastes great too. I added some cornmeal and some whole wheat flour into the mix. That just makes it complex enough while still keeping it nice and light for daily sandwich bread. And you can modify this recipe to your taste. Swap the wholemeal flour and cornmeal for something else. Use any seeds you like to coat the loaf, or perhaps use some oats or bran for coating. It's totally up to you. The recipe is not really important, it's all about the method, so let's get right to it and see what we need to make this. We'll need some white bread flour, water, salt, yeast, coarse cornmeal, whole wheat flour, and a bunch of seeds. I'm using white and black sesame seeds and poppy seeds. As I said, use any seeds and grains you like. As for the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, and a baking tin lined with some non-stick baking paper. It's just there as insurance. I don't trust my tin anymore. And even if your tin is quite reliable normally, fermenting a dough in the fridge and then baking it right from the fridge may still make it stick to the tin. So better be safe than sorry. This is the method I like to use for lining my tins. First, cut out a rectangle piece of baking paper. It should be large enough that when you fold the edges up, they should reach over the sides of the tin. Then do some diagonal cuts from the corners. You don't have to measure anything, it doesn't matter if you cut too deep. When you put the paper in the tin, it will all fall into place. My fridge is around 5 degrees Celsius or 41 degrees Fahrenheit, so I normally aim for a final dough temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. And since this dough is a no-knead dough, we need to use slightly warmer water than normally. My kitchen is around 25 degrees Celsius, that means my flour is around 25 degrees. So after mixing my dough with water that is around 21 degrees Celsius, it should end up being around 25. If this is all confusing to you, you can find out more about temperature control in the Principles of Baking playlist. The most important thing to know here is that if your fridge is cooler, you want to make your dough slightly warmer. If it's warmer, make your dough cooler. Right, let's move on to mixing the dough. In a large bowl, combine the water, the yeast, the salt, the cornmeal and the whole wheat flour. Mix it well. You want to dissolve the salt completely and hydrate the yeast. And you want to disperse the whole wheat flour and cornmeal evenly throughout the mix. We want this mix to be as even as possible because we're not kneading this dough. Right, finally, add the white flour and mix with your scraper until there's no more dry flour left. Using the scraper, smooth out the surface of the dough slightly. Now it's fully mixed. We can take its temperature. As you can see, we go around 25 degrees Celsius, and that is 77 Fahrenheit. In my fridge, this dough will take around 24 hours to rise, but before we can refrigerate it, we need to coat it in some seeds. Use a baking tray for this, to avoid making a massive mess on your table. Ideally, you want a larger tray than the one that I'm using. It will make your job easier, trust me. Now gently drop the dough into the seeds. You want to avoid folding this dough as you drop it down, because having a fold where the dough meets the seeds may result in the seeds being folded into the loaf. Of course, that would not be the end of the world, but ideally you want the seeds to be on the outside of the loaf, not running through the loaf. You can see what I mean about using a larger tray. This was a little bit tight, but it worked anyway. You can sprinkle the seeds onto the loaf, or you can roll the loaf around in the seeds. But again, if you want to roll it, be sure not to fold it, or else you get streaks of seeds in the crumb. Once the dough has been fully coated, carefully move it over to the piece of parchment paper that you cut earlier. Then lift it up and move it to the baking tin. This method makes it foolproof. If you line the tin with paper and try to place the dough right into the tin, there is a high chance of you messing it up. Trust me, I know. Even though the dough will ferment, puff up and fill the tin by itself, I still like to press it down and make it fit the shape. All this pressing down uncovers some sticky parts, and that just gives us another chance for adding more seeds. Guess you can see how simple this recipe is now. Everything has been done. It took no more than 5 minutes to make it. All we need to do now is pop it in the fridge and wait. I baked mine after 24 hours, but it was ready for the oven after around 16. I wouldn't let it ferment for much longer than 24 hours. It may just start collapsing then. This is the perfect weekday bake. You come home from work, mix the dough, pop it in the fridge, and it's ready the next day when you come back from work. Oh yeah, and don't forget to save the seeds for another project. Okay, around 1 hour before baking, preheat your oven. 180 degrees Celsius, fan off. And that is around 356 Fahrenheit. The loaf has risen nicely and filled the tin, but the surface is slightly torn, and this is completely normal. I've made this recipe several times, and it happens every time. It's because we're not kneading this dough. The gluten is weak, and it tears easily as the dough expands. Take the seeds and fill in the cracks. I tried to bake it once without adding extra seeds, because I thought that it may look interesting, but it did not end up looking very good at all. So add some seeds to make it look nice and neat. Right, this is ready for the oven. To make your rice slightly better, you can mist it with some water using a spray bottle. This has been my go-to method for steaming lately. If you want to learn more about steaming methods, check out the video on it in the Principles of Baking playlist. And if you don't have a spray bottle, don't worry about it. This loaf will rise perfectly fine without it. But if you do, then spray the loaf first, place it in the oven, and spray the oven as well. This bread will take around 50 to 55 minutes to fully bake. Normally a loaf like this would take around 40 minutes, but because we're baking it cold from the fridge, it takes slightly longer. To avoid making a huge mess every time you slice it, tip it out on a tray, take off the baking paper, and then brush off any loose seeds. I'm not saying that this will solve the problem, because no matter what you do, every time you slice a seeded loaf, it's like feeding the birds. Saying that, this loaf definitely holds on to its seeds better than others do. The dough was quite wet and sticky to begin with, and then it was sitting in a tin for 24 hours with the seeds being pressed into it. And then of course the baking process made them stick even more. This is as close as you will get to a perfect seeded coating. You can use these toasted seeds for the next project, or sprinkle them on a salad. Nothing goes to waste here. But that's the loaf done. Leave it to cool down on a rack and enjoy. This is by far the easiest recipe I've ever made. I can't imagine right now how I would simplify this even further. There's no kneading, there's no folding, there's no shaping. It is good to be a lazy baker sometimes, and it just shows that recipes don't have to be complicated. I will definitely be trying some different variations of this, perhaps a 100% whole grain version. By the way, if you want to share pictures of your bakes with me and others, check out my Flickr group. We have a nice little community there. You'll find a link to that in the video description or in the pinned comment below. So what do you think of this recipe? What do you think of the method? Could you simplify it? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.